You're going to be turning the slide on.
Right, could I ask everyone that's watching on Zoom if you could mute yourselves, please, because when you cough, it does come through at the club end. Right, our first of the season is Glad You Came.
Can I just ask a question a moment? Is this projecting as you see it on the screen, or is it brighter?
This tends to be a little bit brighter.
I felt it was a bit bright, so I'll try and take that into account. Right, sorry, this one was titled?
Glad You Came.
Glad You Came. Lovely, yes. How wonderful it was when we could eventually hug again. And this is really a reminder of that, a feeling of friends getting back together after the long time that we've had, unable to really meet and greet. There's lovely light on the young lady's face that we can see, good detail in her gown and well, a coat, and the background, yes, it is light, and that lightness, I think, is taking away a little bit of the 3D that we should really see in this image. But nevertheless, it's a good moment, and we'll give that 116.
Speed.
Well, it's a bit of an anomaly, isn't it, when you see an old vehicle like this and you think of it as speed, certainly not the speed that we know now in the faster vehicles. But this is great. I like the fact that the photographer has panned quite well. It's really fairly sharp on this part here, certainly. We need to see the wheels moving, and there is that sense of movement there. And of course, the background. I do feel that the background is a wee bit too light, and of course that's not helped by the presentation here. But I think we've probably got too much of it. Do we need all of this up here? And I guess that the photographer was tempted to leave it there because there is some detail in there, and maybe even that's a very creative picture on its own above there. But do we need it on all of this? Where does your eye go when you actually look at this picture? I suggest that you're drawn all the time to this light background, and that's not what you want. So think about, in this instance, cropping across somewhere about like that. And then if you put your hand up and actually hide that, suddenly that car becomes far more prominent within the picture, and that's exactly what you want. So in its current form, I'm going to give this one 15, I think the photographer has done really well to keep the car and the movement and pan with it at that particular point. But do think about cropping the top to concentrate the eye on that car. And even though it's red, that's what we need to be looking at.
One for the road.
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't looked around really, and you've all got masks on anyway, so I'm not sure whether this is one of your members, but I'll be careful what I say, whatever. Yes, a really good photograph, portrait of this gentleman. A lot of character coming across, and he's got fantastic moustache and beard there, which is well lit. With gentlemen, we can afford to have a little bit of shadow on the left of the face as we see it here. And I think that works well. But a lady, doesn't work quite so well, but certainly for the gentleman, it's great. There's a lot of character and there's a lovely warmth in those eyes. Something we've probably learned more about since people are wearing masks is to see whether the eyes are smiling. I think you know that that gentleman's eyes are smiling. So if he was wearing a mask, I'm sure you'd know that was the case. Lots of character, good image. You can just see the remains of his drink in the glass and also the rim and the form of the glass. So good exposure there too. I'm going to hold this one back, please.
Dartford Crossing.
Well, very unusual view of it. And it's all about the graphics, isn't it? I think here we have just the right amount of sky, the right lead in of the bridge itself and also of the pillar. Really well exposed because there is detail in the dark area underneath the bridge and also detail in the pillar itself. So there's texture there, even though this is projecting a little bit brightly. And what I found with the previous picture and indeed with this one is that because it's slightly better exposed, you've got that depth there, you've got that 3D, which is how we see, and it's really important to bring that 3D back into the picture. So very graphic. Does it excite me? Well, being a female, perhaps not as much as it might. I don't think I would want this one on my wall, but it's extremely well photographed, and I'm going to give it 17.
Portrait of a Norfolk telegraph.
As was. Yeah, it's very much a character, a face again. This time he's definitely not smiling. He's got the very dark suit, and the exposure has given you a problem for that because you have the extremes of the very, very white shirt and then the very dark clothing as well. The lighting, I think, was probably just a wee bit bright, but all of this you can actually deal with in post-processing. So if you've got a raw file, you must post-process it because all the information is there, but the detail is taken out. You have to bring the detail back from the information that's there. And so this one could very easily be worked on this area here, just on a little bit of local reduction in the exposure. Probably have to take some of the highlights down out of the shirt, which shows up even more as a digital image because you have the flashback from the screen. So all of those things you have to remember when you're preparing your files for show here. But his quiff is well lit. There is a challenge in his eyes. They're crisp and they're clear, and you can see into them as well. So overall, it's a really good exposure. Just needs to be really good picture, rather. Just needs that little bit of work that takes but moments to do in post-processing, whatever system you use, whether you're using Lightroom or a camera raw, whichever one, non-destructive, so that if you don't like what you've done, then you can go back to the beginning and start again without any loss. 16.
Refining gold.
Well, it takes us a moment to actually work out what this is. And I really like the way the photographer has led us through into this gap here. So we have very dominant pan, I'm guessing, for the gold, only in large form. And then the area around here, I feel as though we're being drawn through here. Could we walk through there? I have no idea, but we're being taken there by the eye, and that's what works. Perhaps I could do with a little bit of action. Is there some water nearby? Normally when there's gold and panning, there is something else. So this is a close-in detail that leaves me wanting perhaps just something else. I don't know what that something else is. Something related to the gold maybe. I don't think I need a person, but something to bring the story to life. 16.
From pig to pot.
Well, that's an interesting one, isn't it? And I feel that the person in the center of this little plaque that's been sculpted in the wood is sitting warming their hands rather than maybe doing the work. But I'm ready for a cup of tea. Yes, all of us would like a cup of tea, wouldn't we? So again, it tells a bit of story. A fair amount of light on this figure here, on that part on the forehead. I think it could do with just a tiny bit less on that, but more under here where it's become very dense in the shadow, but quite difficult to take, I'm guessing, probably inside and maybe from natural window light. So it's got that softness, it's got the texture of wood. And I suppose these light areas do give us some sheen, some brightness. I say just tone them down a tad, and I think that would work a bit better. 15.
Mullion Co.
A place I know and love, and this picture feels very much like a postcard. I don't know whether that's what the photographer intended. I'm assuming it is a natural picture, but then I wonder, has it just been had textures put over it, or is it a photograph of a photograph? I have no idea. It is slightly flat in the tones, but it's got detail there in the dark and the light areas. Quite grey, but maybe that's the impression the photographer wanted. And I think that in this particular case, you get away with the fairly wide white band around the edge, although where is your eye drawn to? The lightest part of the image, and that is always the edge. So I'll be mentioning that there's a few pictures with the white edge on them, and whilst that works wonderfully on a print, it doesn't always work on a projected image. I think this one you've just got away with it, but it is a little bit flat in tone. It's almost 50 shades of grey, isn't it? But anyway, it tells the story and it has that oldie world feel. 14. Lots and lots of work to do on this. My late hubby was a great enthusiast of train photography rather than trains themselves, but he did enjoy going to drive them on the odd occasion. And I was really surprised that before they start, they have so many places to oil, and it comes into the hundreds, I think, on some of the engines, some of the very big engines. And so that's what they're all off ready for the day, making sure that everything's going to work fine. And it tells us that story. This one again is very bright in the background, and it's flat in the exposure. So if you're taking, I'm guessing that most people take raw files, but they don't always process the image. Now, if you are not able to post-process the image, then you really need to take a JPEG, because that's what happens automatically with a JPEG image. But with a full raw file, you have to bring that 3D back. You have to give it some sense of 3D and depth. And I'm afraid this one really is missing that extra bit of detail. 13. Wonderful little creatures, aren't they? And here the photographer has set the robin right against that very out of focus background, very central in the frame. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, where our eye is taken straight into it. Do I need all of that background? Probably not. You could crop it down and put the robin slightly off center, but as it is, that's how it's presented. Really good detail in the feathers, and I'll give that one 17.
In contrast,
I do like the graphic nature of this image. We are struggling with it being very, very bright in the light areas, but there is detail also in the shadows, and there is detail retained in the white areas. So whilst I think the histogram could be balanced a wee bit more on this image, I think the way it's been taken absolutely works. It's simple, tells us the story without needing to have any more detail, and it's all about the shapes and the patterns that are created by that lighting. I will see that one again, please.
Wild hair running through the wheat.
Lovely image of this hair. The photographer has got down low, and the hair coming absolutely directly at the lens. I think that works really well, and there's that sense of looking straight at the photographer. Presumably the hair was not too worried. Absolutely needs to be central here, so that's fine, and it's well exposed. The photographer here has managed to control that light background so that we look at the hair itself. 17. Oh, to be able to go somewhere like that again, but I'm not sure I could manage all the slopes and the steps that are no doubt there anymore. Really good view. I like the fact that we're looking across at an angle to these buildings at the top, and then we come down to the fields themselves and that pattern that's created with them. And here, the exposure that I was talking about, when the exposure is too bright, then we lose the 3D. Here we do have that 3D in the picture. The hillside behind, beyond the valley, is receding. There's enough detail there to let us know the environment and to bring us back to really enjoy the vineyard and those houses that are around about it. 17. Lovely image, and it's a place that people photograph a huge amount, and why not? And I think here the photographer has got beautiful lighting on it. It's a good day where there is a decent amount of sky. The water has that lovely aqua color about it, and there is detail also in the rocks beyond on the cliffs. Very chalky, of course. Often have areas that are actually lost out to sea, and I think that's probably the remains of one there. So the whole thing tells us a story. I'm going to be a little bit suggesting that I think you have too much of this road. It's not particularly interesting, this part, is it? It leads us through, yes, but there is almost a third of the picture is this particular road that really doesn't have any interest. So I'm going to suggest you put your hands up to actually block out that part to about that part there. And then the picture has really quite a lot more going for it in terms of depth. So if something isn't really working in the picture, although it may be you have to take it at the time because of the positioning and where you want everything, you don't have to show it all. So do think about cropping off. And this one, I think, would absolutely benefit from cropping off. And had it been so, then I probably would have held it back. As it is, I'm going to give it 17.
Alabaster jewellery maker.
I like the position that we have here. We don't have a face, or we don't have the whole of the face. We don't have the eyes to be able to identify them. And I like the fact that we know that the eyes are looking down at the hands and what's going on here. The fact that it's alabaster probably means that those hands have got a lot of white powder on them. And so they are brighter, but there is detail in there. And if this is an indoor shot, then I think the exposure is pretty well done. Again, I'm going to give the photographer the benefit of the doubt that the projection is a bit brighter than you would see it on the screen, because I'm guessing that this doesn't need to be quite as bright as that. And indeed, even the skin tones here are just a tad bright. So I'm going to give the benefit on the basis that this is probably projecting it a little bit too bright for you. 16.
The Sphinx.
Very much a keyhole effect to the lighting on this picture. And so I feel that maybe we are peeping through a narrow area to see this lady beyond in her absolutely fantastic outfit. The photographer has got good detail in there. It's a fairly classic portrait, but it's comfortable, except that her chin is really resting on that hand a wee bit. If you get the chance to talk to them, ask them not to rest the chin completely because it distorts it a little bit, but to actually hold it there and just touch it with the chin so that it's not actually resting on it. But there's good detail in the slightly pink outfit that she's wearing, peachy color outfit that she's wearing, and there's texture in all of those different cloths that are there. So I think the photographer has done a good job of rendering this lady. Do I need it to be quite so dark around the edges? Well, my personal choice would be perhaps not, but this is as it's presented, and it certainly gives us the feeling of the character of this lady. 16.
Dark horse.
Oh, now I need to know the sky to know that one. But the photographer has made a really good job of this. I'm assuming it may be part of the Milky Way, but I might be completely wrong there. But look at the colors. There's an amazing range of tones and colors throughout that image. And if it is stars, the photographer has also managed to make sure that although they are reasonably, possibly a little bit of movement in them, there isn't a streak, so that it perhaps was a fairly fast exposure. And I think it works. None of it is too bright, and none of it is too dark. Do I need a little bit more? I'm not sure, but I think it's been well done. 17.
My first retrieve.
Well, I'm expecting you all to go, even with your masks on. Absolutely. And this picture absolutely shows the character of this little dog. Absolutely happy puppy that's out fetching and happy to have done it. There's that look in the eye of, oh, look what I've achieved. Shows up really well against the background, and a wonderful picture to keep. And I'm going to keep it back and look again, please.
An English summer's day.
Yeah, we've missed a few of these, haven't we, in the last couple of years? And oh, for that freedom. Or maybe it was when we'd just opened up and could go back to these people are fairly well isolated.
No dear.
It has a very, very much a feeling of a postcard. And I think that that works well for this particular scene. It's quite important to have the pathway going through and leading us back through and into the image. So that's leading us in there.
Oh,
A little bit brightly exposed.
I don't know, darling, where you left them.
A little bit brightly exposed. And this is one where the wide white line around the edge, whilst it makes it look like a postcard, really is fighting for the attention because it is so bright on projection. So if you need to put a white line around the edge, then do think about just a 1 pixel. This one really doesn't need it. Sometimes with a dark image, you do need to define the edges. But on a projected image, it really doesn't need that white line around the outside. So please don't do it. It does take away from the rest of the image. And if you actually hide some of it, it's difficult to hide all of it, but if you hide some of it, then you begin to see the quality back in the image itself. Hasn't quite worked for me. 15.
Sun rocket.
Simplicity, a little bit of creativity, I guess, in that sky. And here the photographer has done exactly the right thing to put the silhouette right in the center, use that light in the sky, which I guess has been creatively manipulated to make sure that it works and is in the right place. And this is what I was meaning on the previous picture. Here you absolutely need that key line around the edge. The photographer has kept it just enough to define the edge. 1 or 2 pixels is all it needs. And it actually adds to the image rather than taking away from it. And I suspect this one is not pure white either. It's probably a gray or maybe an actual color from the image itself. So use it for definition. In this case, it works, and I'm going to give this one 17.
The bridge to St. Paul's.
Famous place to go and take pictures, and the photographer is in just the right place to get the angles. I think that this is one of the great views of St. Paul's, especially if it's taken at night when the spotlight is actually on St. Paul's. It gets a lovely grayness about it, almost silver on that roof. But here we have it in the daytime, people moving around, and the photographer has used a shutter speed fast enough to actually freeze all the motion. It's worth going to this place and trying to have a slightly longer exposure. You have to be careful and hold it fairly still though, and then have the people actually walking through the image so you get that feeling of movement. Here I think there are not too many people, so it's not overcrowded, it's busy enough, and there's quite a lot of people over here. But the exposure on this is, I think, what is probably one of the most attractive parts, the aqua color to the glass there. And I have a friend who actually is nominated on that glass, so it is quite an important place as far as I'm concerned. The picture of St. Paul's has got good detail in it. It was a sky that helped you on this particular occasion because it's not over bright. And it is just one of those cloudy, dull days, which helps to get a good exposure throughout the image. 16.
Honeybee on New England duster.
Wonderful, isn't it, to see these little creatures at work? And lovely on this particular one, the photographer has got it really good and sharp on the area here on the eye, and also on that head there where we can see all the pollen. The aster itself is fairly bright. Does that matter? I don't think it does in this case, because the little honeybee is happily working there, and we can see all of that. I think we've got just enough of the flower to make it work. And although there is not enough depth of field to have this wing in focus, that's how we tend to see them. All of this is perfectly in focus, and it doesn't worry me that the wing behind, we only get the impression of it being there, because that's allowed the background also to burn out completely. I'll see it again, please.
Shades of evening.
It's tranquil, isn't it? And there's a certain amount of peace when we look at a scene like this. And if he's got to sort all this lot out, then he's got a job and a half for a while. So it tells us a story. His outline, his silhouette against that beautiful sky, and also helped by this, it tends to tell us, doesn't it, that it's not in the UK somewhere. So it was from those times when we could travel fairly easily. And it's that sort of scene that you want to go out and enjoy to the full. And the fact that the sun is right in the center, perfect place in this particular image, lots of detail, just enough to see into the boat, just enough to see the nets and the floats here. And as I say, that silhouette is so very important. It tells us a lot about the place in which this was probably taken. Yes, I'll hold that one back, please. Wonderful when you look into just a tiny part. And these orchid flowers are really quite small, so this has been magnified highly, and it allows us to see the detail that we really can't normally see just as we look at the flower. I think this one works particularly well because there are shapes and textures within it. There is this wonderful shape coming around here, and then we come to this part, and that yellow helps us to see that particular detail. This tongue comes towards us even more. We don't need that detail, so that's absolutely fine. And I think that this here, I can actually see the feeling of a face up there with two eyes, just looking down on what's going on. But it's lovely. I think the whole picture works very well. It's really well exposed. It's very brave to take an exposure of a white image, and bearing in mind this is projecting probably a little bit bright too, then the photographer has caught that absolutely right, and we can see right into the depth there. And that's got to be another one I'll have a look at again.
Okay. Louise.
Lovely portrait. I imagine that Louise would be quite happy with this picture. She looks a little bit fed up, but sort of teenage-like. There's a really direct look into the eye, and the photographer has got soft lighting on that skin, and soft lighting giving texture to the nose, but not blowing it out completely. There's just a hint of the shadows around that give us the form. So really well done. Lots of detail in the hair. We don't need the whole of the head. And the angle is important across here. If it'd been straight on, it wouldn't have had quite the same appeal. 17.
Fire sweep.
Detail on these wonderful old vehicles is always interesting. And here the photographer has decided to give us just enough to tell us the type of vehicle that it is. Using these red lights, very important, that part. This is the area where there is the most detail and the reflection in the cream. And often we're tempted to go in and just look at that in the photograph. But I think this one works to a certain extent because we have the wing going through here and part of the rest of the vehicle. The unfortunate part for me is that also means that you have to have a very much more of the sky than you really want in this particular case, because it is bright. And once again, as I've said several times, where does your eye go to? It gets dragged up to that light area, and that's not what you want to happen. You want us to look at this, and that's where the real beauty is. And maybe in this particular case, it was not the best to include everything that we have, but this is really well exposed and there's lots of detail there. 15.
Their umbrellas.
Now, was that Durham?
Yeah.
Did you say?
Yeah.
Now I shall have to go there. I've seen several pictures of this and wondered where it was. And thank you, photographer, for telling us. It's good. I like the fact that we're looking up. It's creative. There's a certain amount of reflection in this window here. I think that helps too. And it's all about colour. Fortunately, one umbrella has lost it a bit and gone out of the format. I'm not going to be able to get up and put that right very quickly, are they? But the whole idea works. This one again is overexposed, so it has become flat. I really want the depth to take me through into this image. So don't be tempted to lighten them up, play with the sliders on the light and darken areas, because that tends to just compress everything. And it's far better to work on the raw file, and as I say, on post-processing, to get the depth back there. And this would have so much more impact if it did. Still, you know, an interesting picture, and one that I think you can work on, because that detail is all there. It just needs harnessing. 15.
Protective petals.
Well, the insect here, it's either, yes, it's one of the bees. I'm not sure which one, but it is a bee, probably a bumblebee, going into this tiny flower and getting what it wants. It is a real feeling of the comfort of the flower that's surrounding it. It's not getting any other insect trying to vie with it for actually getting the pollen out. And the photographer has placed it really well to the right-hand side of the frame here. We've got lovely texture on the top of the flower. It's a good color, and this background is out of focus, really out of focus. And that's what helps to make that 3D. And undoubtedly, this picture, as you look at it, you can see that flower is coming towards you. That 3D is there in this image. And then we have the little bee sheltering in it. Can't see much of it, but what we can see has lots of detail, enough to tell us what it is. Another one to see again, please.
3 little owlets.
I won't ask you to say that one again in a hurry. Tongue twister, isn't it? Interesting to see these, presumably on some sort of workshop, and there's absolutely nothing wrong in that.
So we've got agreed excellent.
The photography is good.
I've got cancelled very loud fishing competitions back on William Griffin Toy, who, according to Izzy Silk, may also have a bit of moment in that. We'll find hard while you talk to Griffin Toy and find it.
Sorry.
Anyway, this one is undoubtedly overexposed. And I think probably the brightness of the projector is making that even worse, because they have all become quite flat. And that detail is there, so it is worth spending a bit of time. The background is beautifully out of focus. They are staring directly at the photographer. There is detail in all of this area. This one looks a bit cross, doesn't it? And this one's not all over happy, but they are in a really good grouping. So do think about how you can get the highlights down, get the detail in the shadows, which is all there. You just need to balance it a wee bit more to bring back the 3D. But nevertheless, I'm going to give it 17.
A brutal road crossing.
Again, all about patterns and shapes, and I enjoy that within the image. It's the sort of thing that perhaps only a photographer would see, other people would walk past. And it's all about the link here, the yellow line that we lead across the crossing, and then the yellow line goes out again. And then we come back here, the steps lead us down, and then we enjoy all of the aspects of those pillars and what's between. This is all well exposed, and it does have that sense of depth through the image. 17.
Picking up signals.
Now that's close on, isn't it? And huge magnification. So it does give us the details. Yes, it's the signals of the perfume of the female, isn't it? The scent of the female that they pick up with all these fantastic shapes on them. And the photographer has gone in totally close, narrow depth of field as it would be because it's highly magnified. and the more magnification you have, the less depth of field you have. But this shows up really well against that background. It's got masses of detail here in the eyes, and also on these radar signals as we have, and it tells the story. I wonder how big this moth was. Very small, I suspect. Yes, I will see it again, please.
Marsh fritillaries.
Are these mating or about to mate, rather, should I say? Maybe. A beautiful background, and the background sort of tones in with the flower that they're on. And the detail is absolutely there in this one, all the way across the image. Again, it's gone flat. You know, I don't know what the process is, but this flower doesn't look quite right in terms of the exposure. But the detail is there. Look at that detail in the eyes, the pattern that is there. So I think you do absolutely have to sort out post-processing. It's so important to get that depth back into your pictures and not make them just look flat, because that detail is there, and it's a real shame that some of it's been taken away. But nevertheless, I am going to see it again because it's superb.
Vicuna profile.
Now, you see, this one's slightly less exposed, and that 3D is there, isn't it? There is a depth between the nose here and the ears, and that shows up against that soft background. So whilst it's not the same sort of picture as the previous one, it has a real feeling of life in it and life in the eyes. So I'm going to applaud the photographer for that. I'm not going to hold it back, sadly, but still going to be 17.
Yellow line.
And where's that taking us to? And somebody had a very shaky hand as they put that down, didn't they? So it's leading us to a certain amount of story. It's asking questions that I can't answer in my mind. What's it all about? I think the fact that this concrete is quite wet helps in the image. It gives a little bit more detail and a little bit more excitement to plain or concrete or tarmac road or whatever it is. And that adds a wee bit more. Could it be made more exciting than it is? Maybe. Maybe we need more angle to this yellow line across at an angle to the image. As it is, it's perfectly well exposed and taken, but unfortunately doesn't really excite me as some of the other images. 14.
The Laponian Gate.
What was that? No, I'm not really going to ask you to say it again. Beautiful colours, aren't they? It's that feeling of winter, autumn come winter. And from a height, the photographer has got the light that's on this little bit. It looks quite dull in some ways, but it's enough to bring out the detail in the trees. And then we're led along this slightly contorted line, and we can guess that it goes on to those mountains beyond. So it's brave to take pictures in the portrait format, landscape pictures in the portrait format. And I think it does work with this one. Very important, I feel, that that little pool is between these two areas, because otherwise we would be struggling to get through the image. But well exposed, detail in the white areas of the snowy areas, and also detail on the leaves in the foreground. 17.
Stitchwort.
Beautifully creative. The photographer has decided to put the flower to the left, but the background absolutely out of focus, but with enough detail in it to actually tell us that there's probably one or two more flowers around here. But none of it takes away from the beauty of the flower itself, which has a soft, gently soft focus effect. but is so detailed as well in those white petals. Very, very easily be lost, and it's not. The photographer has kept everything there and made a stunning image that I'll see again, please.
Stuck in time.
Yes, it's interesting. I wonder whether this was taken, it's been taken since lockdown, because there are not as many people as one would normally expect there. And those that are there are really making this one work. So we have these two figures which have that movement on them. I think there's a bit of movement in this, if that's a person there. I really like this one that's propping up the pole and probably on the phone. And then there are just enough people in the background too. It's probably an umbrella on this one, isn't it? Because I see there's an umbrella on those. It is wet, and that's what's helped to give some detail in the floor here. And these are showing up so beautifully bright against the rest of the image. I think it's right to have these people in the background. So we're led through in this particular place, very popular for taking pictures. But the photographer was either here very early or very late by the time that we have here. So what I would have been tempted to do is lose that spot there, maybe this one. I don't think that they are needed because we have this lovely light area across here. And I might have certainly darkened that down, if not lost it. But I like the image, I like the way it's been taken, and I like the relative simplicity of a picture that I normally see, much more complex, many more people about, and this certainly makes it work. 17.
Bob and the Pink Moon.
Black cat crossing the path, maybe. Very much, I guess, a picture that could well have been created in lockdown when we were struggling to do something a little bit different, and also had the chance to see other people doing different things. So here, perhaps a bit of experimentation. The cat absolutely blocked in, but I guess that was intentional against the moon. It tells somewhat of a story. And I like the fact that you've got the background dusty field, so that it feels like the moon is in the right place. It doesn't quite complete the story fully for me. I'm wondering what the full tale is. Maybe I would have liked just a bit more information within the picture, but as an exercise in doing something creative, well done. It's something different, and has worked reasonably well as far as I'm concerned. 16.
No fishing today.
Quite a soft feel to this image. I like the way we're led along that broadway out to the water, and then to that misty feel beyond. All of that works very well. I think this is probably a picture that will make an absolutely stunning print on maybe a textured paper. Perhaps doesn't work quite as strongly as a projected image, purely because it is light here, just a wee bit too bright as far as projection is concerned. And there are images that work better as prints or better as PDIs. And I think this one is probably for the print stand rather than necessarily a PDI, but there is great atmosphere here. 17.
The Ghost.
Takes a moment to think about this one, and is it in a church? There is a feeling that it may well be in a church. Are these the pews and this figure? Well done. I think the idea works. It's got that spooky feel. Again, this will make an absolutely stunning print, and you'll get a lot of atmosphere out of it. So do think about that too. As it is here, yes, I think you've got just the right depth in the ghostly feel. I like the way that the scarf appears, or the shawl, whatever it is that is there, appears to be blending in with the edge of the pew here, because I think that gives the feeling of the ghost itself. And then we've lost the detail again here, and we catch it up again there. So it works well. It's got that ghostly feeling. I'm not sure about, I'm assuming that's some shadows of something. That for me is just a little bit fussy in the image, but doing something different, and it's well done too. 17.
What do you mean it's time to go home?
Well, somebody is very good at titles, and that's exactly the expression on this dog's face, isn't it? Absolutely having a whale of a time in the water there. Beautiful reflection, coat absolutely wet, and I wonder, was there another picture when it came out, or were you absolutely covered with the water as it shook itself? You can see detail in this one into the eyes. There is a real questioning look. And I might be tempted to think that the question was, well, why aren't you coming in with me too, as well? So all of that works really well, and I'll see if again, please.
And the last, the group, ragwort.
Well, ragwort is very rare, and the photographer has used this as a pattern too, looking down onto the flowers rather than anything else. And they look almost, because of these petals coming out on the ones behind, it looks almost painterly, doesn't it? And so it's a very different effect. Yeah, I think the positioning and the composition works well. That one that's quite light at the top, I might have darkened just a tad, but it's a different way of looking at it. For that, I applaud the photographer. 16.
Okay. Right, we have 11 held back. Would you like a run through of the held back?
Yeah.
All right, just bear with me a moment.
And then do you want me to mark them as we go, or do them?
Should we do a
in
run through and
stages?
then mark them as go through them after the run through? Yeah, okay. Here we go. Okay. Start with one for the road.
19.
That's Carol Green. In contrast.
18.
That's Matthew Bickham. My first retrieve.
Has to be 20.
That's Steve Bancroft. Honeybee on New England Aster.
18.
That's Mark Seaton. Shades of Evening.
18.
That's Robin Lee. Sexual Parts of an Orchid.
18.
That's Bill Edwards. Protective Petals.
19.
That's Sue Holt-Smith. Picking Up Signals.
18.
That's Sue Holt-Smith again. Marsh Fritillaries.
19, and I so wish to give that one 20, but it's just not quite processed correctly.
That's Diane LeCount. Stitchwort.
20.
That's Sophia Spurgeon. And finally, what do you mean it's time to go home?
19.
That's Steve Bancroft. Excellent. Okay. Thank you very much, Naomi. That concludes the first half of the evening.